Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it is here. We have experienced it. We have waited and we have played it. Resident Evil 8, or as it is properly called, Resident Evil Village, has been out for a few days. Most people have probably beaten it. It's a Resident Evil game, it's not that long. And I get to finally review a main entry in the Resident Evil franchise here on the channel. The only one I reviewed previously was 2, and that was a remake. So, this is an interesting game. We can't really talk about it without talking about a little brief history of Resident Evil and talking about 7, because 8 is basically 7 too. Which, if you didn't like 7, you'll probably not like 8 too much, but it depends on the reason that you don't like 7. So, Resident Evil had about 5 games come out in a row that were pretty much the same. 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica, and 0. They were all same type of game, fixed cameras, tank controls depending on which game you played. Some of them had like multiple scenarios, stuff like that. You fight a mutant at the end of the game, typically a tyrant, and then the game is over. That was very formulaic, but the lore was always interesting, and it was always unfolding more and more of the story with each entry. People kind of got tired of that, and so the original concept for Resident Evil 4 was trying to get away from that and be more action heavy. It was so action heavy that it became Devil May Cry, if you can believe that. So, Resident Evil 4 ended up becoming what we know it as today, which for a lot of people was very refreshing. It was different from the last few games. It was pushing the franchise in a new direction. For some people, though, it began a trend that we didn't like in the franchise. It gave us what we hated about 5 and 6, with the action and the ridiculousness of the stories themselves, or the over the top theatrics, I guess, that were at one point able to be taken seriously, but they kind of lost that as time went on. Overall, people did not receive 5 and 6 very well, especially 6. So Resident Evil was kind of in a tough spot, especially because the Revelations games weren't very popular either, and neither was Operation Raccoon City. But none of this has been confirmed, but Outlast and PT came out, and I think that gave Capcom everything that they needed to come up with something new for the franchise to push it in yet another new direction, but also bring it back to its roots. And so you have Resident Evil 7, a game which takes place in a house, so it's actually got a reason to be called a Resident Evil. It makes things simple again. It's just you and some enemies and a virus type situation, and you're shooting things. I mean, it eventually becomes an action game like every Resi game does, but overall, the game itself is simple enough. Where it fits into the story is complicated, and we'll get to that when we talk more about 8. But I think 7 was what the franchise needed in order to be reborn into something that could still be enjoyed and still be taken seriously now. All that having been said, now we have 8, which, as I said before, is basically 7 too. All the stuff that worked in 7 is back here. I mean, you're playing as the same character. It's still in first person. It's legitimately scary. 8 is a very scary game for like the first, I'd say, depending on how fast you play, I'd say the first like 3.5 hours. Genuinely pretty scary. And then eventually it does, devolve into an action game like they all do. But as far as like a legitimately intimidating and terrifying experience, you can get that from the first about half of Resident Evil 8. I might go a little bit into spoilers here because I want to say something about something, but I'll try to keep it contained. The visuals in this game are absolutely on point. The RE engine, we already knew it was really good because 7 looked really good, but now that they've had more time and experience with it, Resident Evil 8 looks super good. And the photo mode, well, it's a Capcom photo mode, that's for sure. Not really crazy about it, how they like to watermark their photo mode when you use it, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Bandai does the same thing. Speaking of Bandai, this game is definitely Bloodborne and Dark Souls inspired in some areas, and it totally works. The aesthetic overall, in a lot of places, very gothic, very, very interesting, very attractive. I love it. And one of my main issues with 7 was that the environment just wasn't very imaginative, and it all just kind of blends together. A little bit of that is here in 8, but it's mostly just like the pseudo open world that you get to wander around in between going to other places. But those other places that you go to are all completely distinct from one another, and it's great. There's a freaking, a gothic Victorian castle, or there's a creepy, weird house with dolls all over the place, or there's a swamp marsh with windmills and a big gate that you have to open or whatever, or there's a freaking metal plant that you have to maneuver your way through. Each of these four, well, that was actually a spoiler. Each of these like different dynamic locations that you go to are very uniquely designed from one another, and that's very refreshing, and I really enjoyed that. However, when you're in the main world, in between these places, it is kind of hard to know where you're going because everything does kind of look the same. Sometimes it's like, am I going the right way? Am I backtracking? Have I been here before? Let me check the map. It looks like it looks like I haven't gotten everything, but I can't find anything that I'm supposed to find in here. It's kind of a bit of a give and take there. However, another huge improvement from 7 is the enemy variety. There are a lot of different enemies in this game, like a lot, especially on like a location by location basis, which is very welcome. However, as I'm sure you've seen, there's werewolves in this game. The werewolves can fuck off. I hated fighting them. I just don't I don't dislike that enemy type being in the game. What I don't like is being jumped by like 30 of them. And that happens a couple times. And since it's a Resident Evil game that's not 5 or 6, you're kind of powerless to do anything about it. You find yourself just trying to figure out how you're going to survive. And that's a staple. That's what you do in a Resident Evil game. You figure out who to fight, who to spare, how to conserve your ammo, and like the best way to get from where you are to where you need to be without dying. That's totally fine. But if you put me in a situation where I have to fight my way out, I would prefer it not be against a bunch of bullet sponges, That would be nice. That would be very nice. What else can I talk about? Okay. So I feel like this game might be very divisive amongst the Resident Evil community, depending on how long you've been playing Resi. If you've been around since the beginning, there's a certain point where this might stop feeling like a Resident Evil game for you. And I totally get that. In fact, there's a portion of this game that is 100 million% ripped from PT. And I don't want to, listen. I'm not saying inspired by. I'm saying ripped from. And that's not going to be a negative thing for everybody. I personally really enjoyed it. I liked PT. I would like to see Silent Hills come out someday. But since Silent Hill and Resident Evil have been always seen as like rival franchises, I'm glad that something from one of them is influencing another. That's totally fine. I'm glad that something that did not get to see the light of day is being given new life in the opposite franchise. But it might reek of a lack of imagination for some of you. And that also comes down to enemy designs. There's this Van Helsing looking motherfucker. And at a certain point, what they do with him feels lazy. And I totally valid criticism. I totally understand that. People have been saying stuff like that. But, as I said, since this game becomes an action game at a certain point, it feels like it doesn't even turn into an action game by Resident Evil standards. It just turns into like Bulletstorm. And I like Bulletstorm, but it does not feel like it fits the tone of the game and the atmosphere of the game up to that point. Because I will tell you, this game is atmospheric as fuck. It's great. Sound design, totally on point. Only problem is I was playing on headphones mode, and the sounds that I was hearing were not always lining up with how things were actually going. Like, it would sound like, for instance, Lady Dimitrescu or something like that was like right on my left. I would look, she's nowhere near me. I'm just hearing her for some reason. Like, that's kind of weird. You can't really trust what you hear in that game, which is upsetting because the audio was so good in Resi 2. You could literally hear exactly where in the station Mr. X was. But I guess they kind of fumbled that when it came to this one. Different teams, I know, but still, it's a little disappointing. Um, like I said, this game is very atmospheric. However, in the last hour and a half of the game, it kind of, I don't want to say falls apart, but it kind of falls apart. Uh, and I feel like even if you enjoy this portion of the game and you enjoy the entire game as a whole, like I do, you will still feel like this is inappropriate. Because to be frank, it is. It does not fit at all. It's just, it feels so tacked on. And there's also a really big revelation that ties into the previous game, but it doesn't get explained nearly thoroughly enough. And even if you do supplementary reading, if you read every note that you find in the game, it still won't give you a full picture of what's going on. I don't mind sequel baiting because I will play a Resident Evil 9 if it comes out. But if you are going to make a revelation based on things that happened in this game with characters from this game that ties into things from the last game, I want you to make me understand it before the credits roll. I don't want to sit here and write script for you because that's not my job. It's my job to consume the story. It is your job to craft it. I need somebody who's smarter than me to explain that revelation and that reveal so that I can actually understand it. And it sucks because I've been playing these games for so long. I feel like I should be up to speed when something like, say that there's a revelation in this game that ties back to Code Veronica. Since I played Code Veronica, I should be able to see it and get it. But the way that they deliver the information in this game, it's like, okay, but why is it like that? Because there's a line in the game that's like, oh, you shouldn't even be able to do this. And it's like, okay, why can't I? Oh, you have no interest in telling me? Totally fine. Great, love it. Like, I just don't understand. I don't need my hand held, but I also don't want to be tossed into the middle of a freeway. There's a balance that I feel like is there in some Resi games, but just not so much in this one. From here, I want to get into slightly spoiler territory, so tread lightly. I really like that the lady that we were all so attracted to and so interested in ended up not even being that big a deal in the game. Lady Dimitrescu, sorry, I don't know how to speak Romanian, so I'm doing my best, is very imposing when she's in the game, but about 2 hours in, she stops being in the game. So it's like, oh, okay. And I totally love that. I love that Capcom released a demo for the game, a very small portion of the game, very small sliver of what was playable, and the internet latched onto this lady, and Capcom was like, oh, you like her? Okay, yeah, buy the game for her. And then people were upset that she transformed into something, or that the game is shorter, that the game is kind of goofy, and I'm like, oh, the big boob lady made you buy this game. This is your first Resident Evil. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. This happens. It tends to happen, you know? Resi games are short. Resi games have villains and enemies that transform. That's a thing that happens. Although, once you get past that and the story starts to, like, unfold a little bit more, it's like, oh, I actually rock with that. Not to spoil too heavily, but the thing with the jars, I still don't really get that. I don't know why it's jars. The way that it ties into the ending of the game, I don't see why the jars were necessary. And then again, this is a spoiler as well. I don't like that Resident Evil wanted to introduce these supernatural types of creatures like werewolves and vampires, but it did not lean all the way into it. You introduce something that's pretty new to the franchise, but I feel like most people would just be on board with it because Resident Evil isn't really about what it was about in the past, and it hasn't been in quite some time. So we're just, I mean, the last game was about people that were infected with blue cheese and penicillin. So I think we'd be able to just accept vampires, but no, there has to be a reason that it's actually that she's a bioweapon that just kind of resembles a vampire. Or no, these aren't actually lichens. they're bioweapons that resemble lichens. It's like, why? Why can't they just be lichens? I just feel like they would fit. Um, Also, I don't really enjoy Capcom making Chris seem like such a big deal in the game when in reality he's not. If you played the game, then you know his entire role in the game is basically to give you information at certain to create intrigue and to give you information at certain points in the game, which sucks because he's the co-main character of the first game. He's pretty important to the franchise, but he's treated like a side character here in favor of Ethan Winters. I don't dislike Ethan. I think he's a great character as far as like just being, like a surrogate type. I find him very interesting, but time keeps passing in between these games, and we do not know what's going on with our series mainstays. Where is Shuri? Where's Sherry? Where's Ada? Where's Leon, Chris, Claire, Jill? There's so many characters whose whereabouts we aren't aware of. And then we do get to see Chris, but we don't know what he's really been doing. We don't know what's going on with Sheva, or what's the deal with Blue Umbrella, or what happened to the real Umbrella, or what's up with the BSAA. There's so much that we could be getting information on in these main series entries, these numbered entries. But instead we're getting Ethan Winters from marketing looking for his wife or looking for his kid. And that's not to say that this is a bad approach to the games, but if they're going to be main games, numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, I feel like they should have more bearing on stuff that we are already familiar with. Because now I feel like Resident Evil 9, if they make that, which they probably will, could be about just about anything. I can't predict what characters will be in it because I don't know who Capcom cares about anymore. All that being said, though, game plays really well. It makes you think. It's pretty tough on standard difficulty. There's plenty of replayability. The puzzles aren't really that interesting, unfortunately. That's something that Resident Evil games have been struggling with for a while, is puzzles. This game has a couple that are nice. There's one legitimate head scratcher, but I mean, the biggest puzzle is figuring out how to get back to where I was. And that's just, I don't know. It left me wanting a little bit more. Very fun, very enjoyable, great acting, great music, great visuals. The game is really great in a lot of aspects, but it asks a lot of you towards the end, and it asks you to accept a lot. I think if the last hour to hour and a half had been given a little bit more thought, reworked a little bit better, scripted a little bit better, and the information that it gives you had been delivered a little bit better, this would have been a damn near perfect game. Like, if I was going to give number scores, I would have probably given this like a 9.5. But it does have those issues. So number scores, I'd say this is about an 8. And as far as like, should you play this game if you haven't? Absolutely. Buy this game at full price. It's great. It comes with Resident Evil Reverse. I don't know what the hell that is. I haven't seen anybody talk about it. I don't know if you can play it or not. I've heard it's on like development hell or whatever. Don't even install that. Just install Re8 and play that. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this game, and I can see why if you didn't, I can see why. But Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil Village, have you played it? What do you think about it? Whatever it is, whatever you think, comment below. And Educate is always 2.4 days from buy some merch, subscribe if you're new, join the channel membership, buy some anime merch if you want. You can still support the channel that way. I'll see you next time.